Shabbat Shalom. One of the best parts of being a rabbi is getting to officiate B Mitzvahs. I love watching the way that each kid grows throughout the process and seeing the pride and joy on their faces throughout the ceremony as they're surrounded by people they love and are taking in that grand accomplishment. But I have to tell you something I've noticed over the last few years, both in Chicago, where I was working previously, and now in San Francisco. I can't tell you how many times a wonderful family has come into my office to prepare for their child's B Mitzvah, and we sit down, and I say to the parents, "So, why do you want your child to have a B Mitzvah?" And they look at each other, and they look at me, and they end up saying something beautiful and important like, "Well, Rabbi, my parents or my grandparents immigrated to the United States from Russia or Ukraine, and I went to a school where I was one of the only Jewish kids in my class. I was even teased sometimes for being Jewish. And especially after this really difficult year, I want my child to understand the burden and the responsibility of where they come from." Then I turn to the kid and I say, "So what are you excited about for your B Mitzvah?" And they look straight into my eyes and they say, "Well, Rabbi, I'm just really excited to have a party." And if you are one of those kids, I love you, and I'm very excited to do your B Mitzvah in even a few weeks. I have to tell you, I think these kids are onto something. And part of this discrepancy, part of the responsibility, how we think about it, falls on us clergy. We do not want to perpetuate that old system where we lightly torture kids in Hebrew for an hour and then we send them off to have a party. That's not what a bat mitzvah is. It's certainly not what a bat mitzvah is at Emanu-El. It's our job to help kids feel and understand the meaning of the prayers they're chanting, which are mostly about celebrating. And they're mostly about celebrating the cosmic, joy-filled preciousness of being alive. But part of this is on us. It's on all of us. For all of us who are concerned about Judaism being passed down to the next generation, whether we have kids or not, for all of us who are spiritual seekers, or who just want to connect to this tradition a little bit more, we need to figure out, what is it about Judaism that moves us? What excites us? What brings us pride and deep joy in our Jewishness? And then once we have an answer to that question, how can we pursue it unabashedly? How can we make Jewish joy part of our week to week and woven into the seasons of our lives? Judaism has always tried to help us strike a balance between embracing our suffering and our joy. Most of us know that we break a glass at a wedding, rather iconically, to symbolize that amidst all of that beauty, there's still brokenness in the world. And at a funeral, we say the mourner's Kaddish, that deeply solemn prayer that ultimately asks us to praise God. But somewhere along the way, Jewish messaging has gotten a little mixed up. I'm worried that sometimes, especially like this year where we've gone through a terribly difficult time as a people, we start to neglect that part of Judaism that's about joy. We accidentally come to believe or teach that Judaism is about suffering. We are modern Jews. We're Jews who study history. We're Jews who read the news. We're Jews who've lived through this past year. So we are highly aware of and sometimes personally familiar with Jewish pain. But I'm wondering how many of us are deeply familiar with the practices of Jewish joy. Jewish text, Jewish prayer, Jewish stories are filled with ideas and instructions for how to live a joyful life. Our tradition instructs us to say, Ashrei yoshvei veitecha, od yahalelu chasela. How awesome it is, how happy are we to live in this world. We're going to sing jubilant praises to God. We're supposed to say those words 2 times a day. You can find 14 different words for joy in the Talmud. This includes the word for joy that describes being filled with light, a word that describes a serious, deep, internal joy, and a word for when we're suddenly crying and shouting with joy. Our tradition wants us to experience spiritual joy, physical joy, sometimes both at the same time. We're constantly being commanded to sing, to say blessings over wine, to provide feasts for ourselves and for anybody in our community who cannot afford to have one. There's an incredible story in the Torah that we don't discuss very often. I think we don't really know what to do with it. It's in Exodus 24. It's right after the Israelites have received the commandments. And we're told that the Israelite leaders, Moses, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, and all of the 70 elders, are given a chance to look at the bottom of God's feet. Yes, the bottom of God's feet. They see that the bottom of God's feet are covered in sapphires. And here's what the text says. And I see some of you looking at me strangely, like, what are you talking about? I promise it's in the Torah. Here's what the text says. They saw the God of Israel, under whose feet was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, as clear and as pure as the sky. But God did not raise a hand against the leaders of Israelites for looking at God. Instead, they beheld God, they ate, and then they drank. I'll say that again. They beheld God, they ate, and then they drank. We come from ancestors who know how to have a good time, who see God's feet and throw a rager. We understand that life's most holy and precious moments need to be celebrated with abandon. What would it look like for our Judaism to involve tapping into small moments of joy in our day-to-day? And then every so often, what if we could experience big, ecstatic, communal celebrations where our traditions and our togetherness help us feel just a little more alive? I want to be clear that when we talk about joy, especially joy in very difficult times, I am not advocating for toxic positivity. I'm not advocating for that state where we pretend like everything's good and nothing's hard, and we only talk about how blessed we are. Our joy needs to be authentic. And I want to talk about joy this year in particular, because I'm worried that sometimes we place our suffering at the core of our identity. And while, yes, the Jewish people have suffered significantly, suffering is not a strong enough foundation or building block on which we can build a meaningful Jewish life. Collective Jewish joy is why I'm here today. It's why I became a rabbi, and it's why I decided to apply to be a rabbi at Emanu-El, not because of, but in spite of the fact that 3 people would tell me that I look like my mother every single day. I'm not exaggerating. I want to talk about my parents for a moment. For those of you who missed the email, my parents were the previous senior rabbis of this congregation. They just retired. They are enjoying the high holidays in New York. And yes, they are going to lovingly watch the recording of this on Sunday morning and send me some feedback. But I want to talk about them not as rabbis, but as parents. As parents and as people, they always thought that Judaism was genuinely fun. And because they felt that way, they made it really fun for all of us. I'm not talking about obvious holidays like Purim and Hanukkah. On Passover, we would run shrieking delightedly through the sprinklers in our front yard to mimic the Israelites crossing the sea. Every year on Shavuot, we got to stay up until midnight reading whatever book we wanted. And you can hear we had a very wholesome childhood. And every year, we would invite the entire congregation over to our house for Sukkot. What made this was an incredibly magical experience was actually the trip to Costco. Every year, we would go to Costco and we would buy massive tubs of rainbow sherbet and those giant cases of jelly beans. And this ended up being very important to my Jewish identity because I grew up in Seattle, which is one of the most secular parts of the country. And so kids would come up to me at school, that this really happened, and they would say to me, "Rena, why are you so Jewish? Don't you know that religion is bad? Don't you know that religion causes war? Don't you know that religion kills people?" And I would look at them like they were crazy. Didn't they know that religion was what filled my home every year with somewhat odd but mostly very kind people? I'm trying to be honest up here, and authentic. Didn't they know that religion tells us to build a beautiful structure, a sukkah in our backyards, to sing, to eat together, to breathe in the fresh fall air? Didn't they know that religion told us to go to Costco and buy giant tubs of rainbow sherbet and jelly beans? I want you to take a moment and think, if you had to guess, what is the most joyful holiday of the Jewish calendar according to the Talmud? The most joyful holiday, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, is Yom Kippur. The texts tell us that Yom Kippur is a day of joy because it's a day of forgiveness. Before we fast, we are instructed to have a joyful meal to help remind us that fasting is not about making us miserable. Fasting is about growing gratitude for everything we have. We learn from this that joy comes through growth and comes through effort and comes through experiences that often seem hard or strange. The great medieval philosopher Maimonides wrote, "Whoever performs mitzvot, whoever performs commandments with joy, they are providing a great divine service." Our tradition asks us to do all kinds of strange things joyfully, like fasting, like building huts in our backyard for Sukkot, like making 13-year-olds chant from the Torah in front of all of their friends. In our modern world, sometimes these practices seem taxing and outdated. But I think when we dig into them, when we try to understand the purpose behind them, most of them are trying to add rich layers of meaning and joy to our lives. We need joyful Jewish experiences, and we need them now more than ever. This last year has been the hardest Jewish year of most of our lifetimes. So many of us have been grappling with what it means to be Jewish. And as somebody who is relatively new to this community, I want to reflect back to you the very wide range of reactions I've heard over the last few months from you all. Some of us feel extraordinarily let down by the rest of the world. After October 7th, we feel like Jews have once again been left cold to defend ourselves from those who seek to hurt us. Others of us are furious. We're furious at the government and extremists in Israel. We're furious at our families, and we're furious at our rabbis. And still, people in both of those groups are scared. We're scared of the anti-Semitism we're seeing not just around the world, but in our own backyards. With all of this disappointment, with all of this anger and fear, it may be hard to convince any of us that this is the time for Jewish joy. But we are inheritors of a tradition that commands us to use joy to drive out darkness. Whether we're dancing across the sea as we leave Egypt, or we're feasting on Purim, or even this year, we're going to be dancing on Simchat Torah, on that joyful holiday that is now marked by the October 7th massacre that happened 1 year ago on that holiday. We are not canceling the holiday. We're going to be dancing, and if you've had a hard year, I hope that you will join us. We're going to be dancing with our Torahs, our scrolls of joy, not because we are indifferent to the immense Israeli and Palestinian suffering that has taken place since that date, but because we have to keep asking ourselves, who are we without our joy? How can we keep trying to be a holy people who partner with God, who pursue peace, who repair the world, if we do not have life-affirming, community-building moments of simcha, of joy? I want us all to take a moment and imagine that we're at that bat mitzvah party of that kid who was so excited to get to the party. We're at the party, and somebody places 2 chairs in the middle of the dance floor. And we all know what that means. It means that it's time to dance the hora. We grab the hands with the person next to us, and suddenly we're spinning around the room, surrounded by people we love. In that moment, we are immersed in joy. But as we spiral around the room, we begin to see not just our family dancing, but our grandparents, our great-grandparents. Suddenly we're dancing with Jews from throughout the world and throughout time. Over the next 24 hours, over the next year, even in a year that will surely have a lot of pain and difficulty, let's unabashedly pursue Jewish joy. Let's sing loudly. Let's dance. Let's invite people into our homes and discover new and old ways to celebrate being Jewish, celebrate being together, celebrate being alive. We are inheritors of a tradition that commands us to drive out darkness with joy. Gamar Chatima Tova and Shabbat Shalom.